When we think of Japan in the latter half of the 20th century, we think of a miracle, a nation rising from the ashes of total war, its cities flattened and its spirit seemingly broken, to become the second largest economy on Earth. In just a few decades, Made in Japan transformed from a label of cheap trinkets into a hallmark of unparalleled quality and innovation. It was a story of resilience, of national unity, and of breathtaking ambition, a story that amazed and inspired the world. But what if that's only half the story? What if, beneath the gleaming chrome and the soaring stock market, there was a darker narrative? A story of sacrifices that were never acknowledged, of costs that were never tallied in any economic report. This is the story of the hidden atrocities behind Japan's economic miracle. It's a story not of grand malicious design, but of 1,000 quiet tragedies born from a single-minded pursuit of progress. It's about the people who built the miracle, and the price they, and their nation, would ultimately pay. A price measured not in yen, but in life's health, and a slow creeping tear in the very fabric of society. Act 1. The Forge of a Nation. The human engine of the miracle. To understand the human cost of the miracle, you have to understand the mindset that fueled it. After the devastation of World War II, Japan was a nation gripped by a singular, unifying goal: to rebuild and reclaim its place in the world. This wasn't just an economic policy, it was a national crusade. And the soldiers in this new war were the ordinary Japanese people. A new kind of warrior was born. The corporate warrior. Loyalty to one's company became the highest virtue, a modern-day form of fealty. The company wasn't just a place of work. It was a family, a community, and a purpose. In return for lifetime employment, the Japanese worker pledged almost total devotion. This meant long hours, unquestioning dedication, and the sublimation of personal life for the greater good of the corporation. But this devotion had a dark, insidious side effect, one that would eventually earn its own chilling name: karoshi, death from overwork. The first officially recognized case of karoshi occurred in 1969. A 29-year-old man working in the shipping department of one of Japan's largest newspapers suddenly died of a stroke. His family fought for years to have his death recognized as work, a battle against a system that saw such sacrifice as noble, not negligent. The concept of karoshi was difficult for many to accept at first, because the work culture was so deeply ingrained. Working 100 or more hours of overtime in a single month wasn't seen as exploitation, but as a sign of commitment. There was even a term, sebasu, which meant service over time that was unpaid, offered as a gift of loyalty to the company. Declining this service could impact one's reputation and career. It was a powerful, unspoken pressure. Narrator. As the decades wore on, the stories multiplied. Men in their 30s and 40s, seemingly in the prime of their lives, collapsing from heart attacks and strokes. The story of Joey Takneng, a 27-year-old trainee from the Philippines, is a stark reminder that this pressure wasn't confined to Japanese nationals. In 2014, he died of heart failure in his company dormitory. Authorities later ruled his death was a direct result of the punishing overtime he was forced to perform. Then there were the suicides, a phenomenon known as the case of Matsuri Takahashi sent shockwaves through the nation. A 24-year-old graduate of the prestigious Tokyo University, she landed a dream job at the advertising giant Dentsu, but her dream quickly soured. Her social media posts told a story of crushing despair. "I'm going to die. I'm so tired," she wrote. "I'm physically and emotionally shattered." An investigation found she had logged over 100 hours of overtime in a month. On Christmas Day 2015, she took her own life. Her mother Yukimi later spoke of a chilling corporate rule at Dentsu: if you get the job or any project, don't let it go, even if you die. The pressure wasn't just on adults. The drive for success started much earlier. In the crucible of Japan's education system, the path to securing a position at a top company began in childhood. The Japanese education system, while lauded for producing high literacy and numeracy rates, became a pressure cooker of immense intensity. The key to a successful future was getting into a prestigious university, and the gateway to that university was a series of grueling entrance exams. This process was, and still is, known as Sheikun Jigoku examination hell. It's a trial that can start as early as junior high. Students spend their days in regular school and their evenings and weekends in private cram schools called juku. Life becomes a relentless cycle of study, mock exams, and memorization, all aimed at passing a single life-altering test. For many, academic success was seen as the only path to a secure life. The pressure was immense, not just from schools, but from families and society at large. The term Kyoku Mama, or education mama, emerged to describe mothers who devoted their lives to pushing their children through this grueling system. The psychological toll was severe. Anxiety, depression, and burnout became common among teenagers. Tragically for some, the pressure was too much to bear. Japan's teen suicide rate has long been a source of national concern, often linked to academic stress. These were the children sacrificed at the altar of economic ambition, their futures cut short before they had a chance to even begin. Act 2, The Poisoned Archipelago, The Environmental Scars. While the human spirit was being strained, the land itself was crying out in agony. The same relentless drive for production that fueled the economic miracle also led to a catastrophic disregard for the environment. From the 1950s to the 1970s, Japan was arguably the most polluted country in the world. This wasn't just an issue of smog or dirty rivers. It led to some of the most horrific environmental disasters in modern history, collectively known as the 4 big pollution diseases of Japan. The most infamous of these tragedies unfolded in the small, picturesque fishing town of Minami. The people here had lived off the bounty of the Shiranui Sea for generations. It was their livelihood and their larder. But in the 1950s, a strange and terrifying illness began to appear. First, in the town's cats, which were seen dancing erratically before dying. Then, the same horrifying symptoms appeared in the human population: difficulty walking and speaking, convulsions, a narrowing of the field of vision, loss of sensation in the limbs. On May 1, 1956, the condition was officially recognized as Minamata disease. It was a neurological disorder of unknown origin. The truth, however, was far from unknown to one entity. The Chiso Corporation, a chemical factory, was the town's major employer and the engine of its prosperity. Since 1932, the factory had been discharging industrial wastewater containing methyl mercury directly into Minamata Bay. This highly toxic compound accumulated in the fish and shellfish, the primary food source for the local community. Masami Ogata. Minamata disease first caused damage to my family in September 1957. My grandfather, Fukamatsu Ogata, suddenly developed an unexplained illness. He passed away 2 months later. We were never told what caused the illness. When I became an adult, I noticed that I had very little sensation in my limbs. The company knew. Evidence later revealed that Chiso was aware of the devastating effects of its wastewater for years, even conducting its own secret experiments on cats that confirmed the link. Yet, they did nothing to stop the discharge. The government, prioritizing economic growth over public health, was slow to act. The social stigma was as devastating as the physical symptoms. Victims were ostracized, believed to be contagious. Fisherman Hashiguchi, an early victim, recalled how people on trains would shut their windows when passing through Minamata. He said, "A lot of people did not apply for certification as victims, because if you did, your children would have trouble getting jobs or getting married." Families were torn apart by shame and fear. The disease was even passed to the next generation. Babies were born with a severe congenital form of the disease, their bodies and minds damaged before they ever took their first breath. Shinobu Sakamoto was one such victim, poisoned in her mother's womb. Her older sister died at the age of 5. The fight for recognition and compensation would take decades. A long, painful struggle for justice against corporate and governmental indifference. At the same time, another nightmare was unfolding in the city of Yokkaichi. In the late 1950s, a massive petrochemical complex was built. Part of Japan's push to switch from coal to oil. The crude oil used was high in sulfur, and without proper desulfurization, the complex belched enormous quantities of sulfur dioxide into the air. The sky over Yokkaichi was often filled with a white, foul-smelling smog. Soon, the local population began to suffer from severe respiratory problems, chronic bronchitis, pulmonary emphysema, and especially bronchial asthma. The condition became known as Yokkaichi asthma. In the most polluted districts, like Isuzu, the incidence of asthma was shockingly high. The local fishing industry was also decimated, as fish caught in the bay developed a bad taste and were unsafe. Once again, citizens' complaints were initially ignored in the name of industrial progress. It took a landmark court case in 1972, where a group of plaintiffs successfully sued the 6 companies of the complex, to finally bring about meaningful change and establish the principle that polluters must pay. These were not isolated incidents. They were the predictable, tragic outcomes of a national policy that put economic growth above all else, treating the environment not as a precious resource, but as a limitless dumping ground. Act 3. The Forgotten Corners. The social outcasts. The light of the economic miracle did not shine on everyone equally. For every new middle-class family, enjoying their television and washing machine, there were others left behind, living in the shadows of prosperity. To find them, you had to go to places that didn't appear on official maps. Places like Sanya, located in a corner of Tokyo. Sanya was the city's largest doyagai, or flophouse town. For decades, it was the bustling hub for day laborers, the men who formed the disposable, unacknowledged workforce that literally built modern Japan. They constructed the skyscrapers, the highways, and the venues for the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. Every dawn, thousands of men would gather in parks and on street corners, hoping to be picked by a contractor for a day's work. These were often men who had fallen through the cracks of society, displaced farmers who lost their land to industrialization, or those who simply couldn't fit into the rigid corporate structure. They lived in cheap, crowded rooming houses, often in squalid conditions. Sanya became a community of the dispossessed, a place with its own culture and its own codes, but it was a life of hardship and instability. As the men aged, their bodies worn down by years of hard labor, they became unable to compete for jobs. The once active hostels slowly transformed into grim, unofficial retirement homes for men living on meager pensions. The government, embarrassed by this pocket of poverty amidst Tokyo's glittering success, tried to erase it. In 1966, the name Sanya was officially removed from maps. The area split between other districts, but the people and the problems remained. They were the forgotten builders of the miracle, left to fend for themselves once their labor was no longer needed. There was another group systematically excluded from the fruits of the economic boom, the Zainichi Koreans. This community, comprising Koreans who had come to Japan during the colonial period, many as forced laborers and their descendants, found themselves in a precarious position after the war. In 1952, with the signing of the San Francisco Peace Treaty, Japan regained its sovereignty. In a move with devastating consequences, the Japanese government stripped the Zainichi Koreans of their Japanese nationality, rendering them foreigners in the only country many of them had ever known. This was a critical turning point. Suddenly, hundreds of thousands of people were stateless. They were barred from public sector jobs and faced systemic discrimination in employment, housing, and even in securing loans or medical insurance. They were essentially pushed to the margins of society, forced to create their own ethnic economy in sectors like restaurants, scrap recycling, and entertainment to survive. The autobiography of Kang Sun-jung, a prominent Zainichi academic, offers a poignant glimpse into this world. He was born in a Korean settlement in Kumamoto during the Korean War, a time when the road home had been closed for his parents' generation. He writes of growing up with two names, a Korean one and a Japanese one, a symbol of the dual, often conflicting identity that so many Zainichi had to navigate. For decades, they were subjected to a fingerprinting requirement for their alien registration cards, a practice many saw as a humiliating violation of their human rights. Choosing to naturalize as a Japanese citizen was often seen as an act of betrayal within the community, yet not doing so meant living as a perpetual outsider. They were the invisible workforce, the taxpayers without representation, who contributed to Japan's economy while being denied many of its fundamental benefits and securities. Act 4. The Bursting Bubble and the Long Shadow. By the late 1980s, the economic miracle had morphed into a full-blown speculative frenzy. It was the era of the bubble economy. Stock prices and real estate values soared to astronomical heights. At one point, the land value of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was said to be worth more than all the real estate in California. Japan seemed poised to overtake the United States as the world's #1 economy. The party, it seemed, would never end. But in 1990, the bubble burst. The stock market crashed, and land prices began a long, agonizing collapse. The fallout was devastating. Banks were saddled with mountains of bad debt. Companies went bankrupt. The era of rapid growth was definitively over, replaced by a period of economic stagnation so prolonged it came to be known as the lost decades. The crash didn't just expose financial recklessness, it laid bare the deep, structural problems that had been papered over by decades of growth. The very foundations of the miracle, the rigid corporate culture, the social conformity, the reliance on endless expansion, now became a trap. The lifetime employment system began to crumble, leaving a generation of young people facing a brutal job market. This lost generation, who graduated in the 1990s and 2000s, missed their one shot to get on the corporate ladder, and were often relegated to a life of unstable, low-paying, temporary jobs. The social contract had been broken. The social fallout was profound. The intense pressures of the high-growth era, from the examination hell to the relentless demands of the workplace, had created deep-seated anxieties. The phenomenon of hikikomori, or acute social withdrawal, saw hundreds of thousands of young people, mostly men, lock themselves in their bedrooms for months or even years, unable to cope with the societal expectations they felt they had failed to meet. The demographic dividend that had fueled the miracle also reversed. The same families who had fewer children to invest more in their education during the boom years contributed to a demographic cliff. Today, Japan has one of the oldest populations in the world. Facing a shrinking workforce and a looming social security crisis, the environmental scars remain. While Japan has made enormous strides in pollution control, the legacy of diseases like Minamata continues. Victims and their families still fight for full recognition and compensation, a testament to a wound that has never fully healed. The Japanese economic miracle was not a myth. It was a real and astounding achievement, a testament to the incredible resilience and determination of a nation. But it was a miracle with a dark and complex legacy. The story isn't a simple morality tale of good versus evil. It's a cautionary tale about the pursuit of a single goal, whether economic or otherwise, at the exclusion of all else. It shows how the relentless pressure to conform and succeed can crush the individual spirit, how the drive for production can poison the very earth and water that sustain us, and how a society that prizes unity can marginalize those who don't fit the mold. The hidden atrocities were not inflicted by a foreign enemy, but were the byproduct of a system that, for a time, lost its sense of balance. The salaryman who worked himself to death, the child who buckled under academic pressure, the family shattered by industrial poison, The laborer discarded in old age, their stories are not mere footnotes to an economic success story. They are central to it. Perhaps the true miracle of Japan is not just its economic rise, but its ongoing struggle to confront this difficult past, to create a society that is not only prosperous, but also just, inclusive, and humane. A society that remembers that the true measure of a nation's strength is not found in its GDP, but in the well-being of all its people.